Thank you for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. A Glimpse of the Kingdom can remain free because of generous donors like you. If you'd like to donate, feel free to do so online, or you can send payments through Facebook Messenger. Don't forget to tell your friends about it so that they can enjoy this ministry as well. Be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any podcasts.
You can listen to my daddy every single day, like in the gym, in the car, or just at home. Glimpse of the Kingdom is awesome!
Big picture. So I'm looking at the handout that you have too. I have it right here in front of me. I've encouraged you to think about why you're a Christian. There's a great need to figure that out. You are not, preliminary remarks, you're not all in the same boat. Not every one of you deals with a rigorous, intelligent atheist all the time. That's okay. It's okay. But since there are people who listen to this podcast and watch the Facebook video, and some of you do interact with people who are very rigorous atheists, I try to cover as many bases as I can without going too much in depth. To get more in depth, I've given you book suggestions on your handout. You can read all you want and always come to me if you want more questions. But I'm just trying to cover it broad. Atheism is supposed to be the belief that is the proposition God does not exist, but that's a long story. Let me skip ahead to all the way down to page 3. Page 3, what would it take for you to believe something? I ask that question to people when they're not believers. Why really do you not believe? Why really do you not believe? And if you're a Christian or any religious, what is it really? There are kinds of Christians who think that you don't have to have any evidence, you just have to have a religious experience, or you just know that you know that you know, and that's a legitimate way to look at it. If someone asked me, what would it take for you to believe something? I would say, personally, this is David, I said this last time, I need some kind of evidence. Because while my religious experience is the reason why I know, I could be delusional. And I don't want to be delusional. So I need some other evidence that corroborates my religious experience. Imagine for a second you had this phenomenal experience of going to Disney World and then come to find out you were dreaming. So how can I decide that? Well, let's see if you have an airplane ticket. Did you go there? So you could disconform. You could say, man, you never went. You might have had a vision of Disney World. Maybe you got enraptured in a commercial, but you didn't go. I know you were with me and we were playing softball. You can say you had a great experience, but it was false. It's not based on reality. To really make it convincing to me is both the experience of Disney World and evidence that you went there. Does that make sense to you? Souvenirs, that's right, good. Both archaeological souvenirs and intellectual souvenirs, maybe other people who are there with you. Well, that's like that with religion. And so for me, the reason why I really think, the real reason why I think Christianity is true is because I have direct knowledge of Him. Direct knowledge of Jesus and Father, Son, and Spirit. That's why I know. But the reason why I don't lead with that with most people is because religious experience is so subjective, it won't prove it to someone else, which is why I don't use religious experience as an argument. I mean, let's flip it to somewhere else. If a Mormon comes up and said, I had a big, powerful, warm, fuzzy feeling in my heart when I read the Book of Mormon, which is what they say, that's my argument for Mormonism. I find that very unpersuasive. I would say, you might have had an experience that does not convince me that it's true. It's not an argument. I think it works with Christianity the same way. I don't think it's an argument that it's true. Having said that, I'm just trying to understand here, I'm convinced that's how I know it's true. I just don't use it as an argument to show it to you. How do you know you're at Disney World? Because I know that I experienced it. Well, that doesn't prove it to you. You need other stuff. So that's the first reason. So I take religious experience and I take a bunch of other things that I think point to it. That point to it is on the bottom of page 3. That's the direct evidence and circumstantial evidence. I'm convinced that the proposition Christianity is true can be demonstrated by both circumstantial evidence and then move to direct evidence. You don't have to do it this way, but it is the way I do it. Let me give you an analogy real quickly before I move on. If we went up to a room upstairs and I said, look at this stuff around here. There's princesses and Cinderella stuff and unicorns and pillows and Barbie dolls. And I'd say, I posit that a little girl lives here. And then the person beside me doesn't believe in little girls. Go, I know that little girl lives here. And they said, why do you say that? Well, where is she right now? I said, well, no, she's not in the room. Well, that's convenient. Well, it's not convenient at all. I wish she were here because she could introduce herself. Well, then where is she? Point out something. Where's her? She's got to be made of something in here. No. The little girl's not made of things in the room. She's not made of wood at the bed. She's not made of springs in the mattress. No. Well, then what makes you say she's alive? Well, two reasons. One is if I look at all the clues in the room, the things I listed like unicorns and Barbie dolls and whatever, it's possible a little boy did that. It's possible it exploded in a magical confusion. Possible unicorns or aliens dropped it off. There's all kinds of things you could say. It just seems to me when you put all this evidence together, it sure is pointing to, I bet a little girl lives in this room. That's circumstantial evidence. Those are clues that point to something. The second reason I'd say, and I know the little girl lives here, is because I met her. Her name's Julia. Well, make her appear right now. I can't. She's not here. But why do you think she exists? Because I've experienced her. You following with me? Well, that's just normal analogy. Now, by default, immediately, the odds are very high. If you came into a stranger's house, and they said that to you, you'd probably all go, yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah, this stuff, you put all the data together, it sure points to a girl. I haven't met her, but that does make a lot of sense. Maybe that guy who talks about his girl is delusional. Maybe he hears voices and sees, but maybe he fixed it himself. I mean, you can make up all kinds of alternative theories, but that's exactly how it is with Christianity with me. I think there's a bunch of clues. The clues don't prove it, but the clues sure do point. That's what circumstantial evidence is. And knowing my daughter directly is called direct evidence. Circumstantial evidence, the clues, direct evidence is one-on-one knowledge. Those two things, I think, go together in Christianity. I think, in my view, you need both. You need both. Now, does that make sense? I want to pause there because this is a quick review before I move on. Does that make...
How it feels.
Fair enough. Okay, so to repeat that, what you're saying is when you're 18 years old, you had an experience, and I'm paraphrasing, you had an experience. You didn't have much evidence, you had experience. Absolutely justified. Many people I meet have an experience before they know a bunch of clues. And they discover the clues later on. They go, all this time, now I see it. That's okay. Back to my analogy. If you met Julia before you saw her room, you'd be perfectly justified and say, yeah, I met her. Have you seen her room? Give me a bunch of circumstantial evidence. I don't need it. I already met her. Name's Julia. We talk, have a relationship. Where is she right now? Well, I can't make her manifest her presence, but I met her. Unless you demonstrate I'm delusional, I have a reason, I have a warranted belief. Let's attack that belief and say maybe John was delusional. Let's figure out whether daughters ever can exist, if there was a girl of that name and where she lived at that address, and to come to find out, none of those things lined up. And no one's ever heard of Julia. And there's no evidence whatsoever that corroborates that. She has no parents. There's no record anywhere. There's no DNA evidence. Well, then it leans toward likely you just had some kind of experience, but it ain't real. So let me pause there for a second. I'm saying those are two different things. Now, some people will still say, David, I don't care. I know that I know that I know. You can say that. Some people say that about alien abduction. They say that about sighting Elvis. They say it about experience the Mormon God. And they can say that, and I think they can be justified in saying it. It's just that, personally, I wouldn't find it convincing. I need both. I like the experience plus corroborating evidence. I'll move on quickly. So that's the forest. We're talking about, if someone says, why do you think God exists? Oh, I should have said this too. Don't forget, when it comes to Christian theism, that's the top of page 2, right at the top. That's a worldview. As a Christian, Christians do not believe that God is a fixture in the universe, no more than I thought Julia is made of wood. So it means anytime you ever hear an atheist or non-believer put God or Yahweh, capital G God, in the same sentence as Thor or Zeus or Amun-Ra, a bunch of foreign gods, Shakti, Vishnu, it means immediately they do not know what they're talking about, and with due respect. Yahweh or Allah or Christian Trinitarian God are not a fixture in the universe. You can't go to a certain galaxy and find them. God doesn't ride on the wind of the thunder like Thor did. They don't live on top of a mountain like Zeus did. God's not here in space-time continuum like that. The closest we get to something like that is Jesus. And guess what? We have evidence that Jesus existed and did things. We're going to go to that later on. But So that's why in Christian theism we say, where's your evidence? I have circumstantial and direct evidence. We go, where is he right now? If you mean like, is he around the corner? No, he's not like that. Well, isn't that convenient? Well, it's not convenient at all. It's about the God I believe in. He's not a thing in the universe. He's not out in the sky. He's not in space. So that rules out every other God in the entire, that's ever been invented. That's not the Christian theistic God. And that's why, to use my analogy of Julia, it's like saying there's a room full of clues, but only certain people meet the God. Well, I think the universe is full of clues, but only certain people have met them. And what I'm doing now on page 4 is to give you these 3 layers of probability. I think 2 different kinds of things. I think you might say facts of reality make it quite probable. These are clues in the room for Julia. They're clues. They don't prove God exists. I just think they point that way. And then the second major thing is quite probable. We'll go to very probable. That's when we get to the manuscripts in New Testament itself, the Gospels. Does that make sense what I'm doing so far? That's it. That's what we're doing. Can I go ahead very quickly? Okay, you stop me. Now, I remind you, I'm going to go for a while and then pause for questions, and it's not because I don't care what you have to say, but I'm trying my best to keep going. Page 4, I think God is the best explanation for why anything exists at all. I think he's the best explanation why the universe had a beginning. If it's an event, there had to have been a cause. The cause has to be not made of matter and energy and time and space. I don't think universes pop into existence. You can't say a quantum vacuum. That's like saying a zygote, the earliest stage of development. I covered all this before. Watch the video if you haven't already, or listen to the podcast. You're not going back far enough if you say anything about quantum anything. It had a beginning. It popped into existence. Why? Naturalists are going to say there's no explanation, just popped into existence. That's possible. I think it's silly. I don't think it happened. I think it's much more rational to say God created it, much like I create a thought. 3, while the universe has constant quantities that are fine-tuned for life, scientists know for a fact that the universe is exquisitely fine-tuned like knobs for life to exist. Not humans to exist, though that's true too, but life. Life. Stars would not have formed, and on it goes. And we talked about this last time. That's where we ended last time, was on the laws of nature. And so any quick questions about numbers 1 through 3? We're going to go faster after this, besides morality, but any question about that, number 1, 2, 3?
Say God chose to do it that way.
That God chose to do it that way?
Everything that he did was his choice, his desire, to give him pleasure.
Right, so the Christian would say he decided to do it that way. Correct. That's right. And back to my analogy, if someone said, okay, if Julie exists, why are there unicorn pillows on the ground? Then I would say because she chose to do that. I don't think a criminal did it. I don't think an alien dropped it off. I think my daughter, for some reason, usually likes to throw pillows on the ground for some unknown reason. She does. She decided. So yeah, that's right. So these are clues, I think, point to God. Like number 4, I think God's the best explanation for why there are what we call laws of nature. Now, I have a video, but I'm not going to show that tonight because of time. C.S. Lewis has a great talk about laws of nature. And if you go to YouTube, you can look it up, Laws of Nature by C.S. Lewis. It's only 7 minutes long, but I'm going to save us time. Now, I want to say this because this is very common for naturalists to respond back. So let me say this. A law is just shorthand for a behavior that typically repeats itself. A behavior that typically repeats itself. That's what a law is. That's all it is. Laws are not immutable. That is, it's not like they can't change no matter what. They're not unchanging things. They're patterns. They're just patterns. And laws cannot create something. They might explain an event, why this marker falls down. They'll make up something called law of gravity. But the law of gravity, the law did not make this fall. It's the way we talk about the pattern that this typically falls down. Laws don't make anything, don't create anything ever. Laws can't create a universe. Now, theism, let me back up. Naturalism doesn't tell us at all where these laws come from. Remember, if there's nothing but physical stuff, It doesn't tell me where they come from, because these laws supervene on stuff. On theism, the laws of nature are just a description of how God runs the universe. It's one of the descriptions. And there's one verse I can find in the Bible that talks about this. It's Jeremiah 33:25. Jeremiah 33:25. He says, in the NET translation, "But I, the Lord, make the following promise. I have made a covenant governing the coming of the day and night. I have established the fixed laws," and that word in Hebrew can mean law, ordinances, commands, routines, patterns. "I've established the fixed laws governing heaven and earth." That's one of, and there are many other allusions in the Bible where they do not think God does everything. They don't think God is pushing the marker to the ground, like God's going with his divine finger. Jews didn't think that. Christians don't have to think that either. It's okay to think that God designed certain things to operate according to fixed laws, like Jeremiah just said in Jeremiah 33:25. Does that make sense to you? So laws of nature exist, like the laws of gravity and whatever. I'm not going to spend much time there. If you want to spend more time, read the books. But they're all laws of nature. Go back.
Round the clock and lets it run. He can reset the clock or stop it.
Gotcha. So God wound the clock and lets it run. Right. If that's all he did, if you remember,
I mean, that's part of it.
if that's, I'm just saying, that is good. If that's all he did, that's the good definition of deism, as we talked about a couple weeks ago. Deism is the belief that there's an all-powerful creator God who established these laws, create the universe, and then basically step back, as it were. Does not reveal him or herself or itself, doesn't interact with creation.
Well, I think he does.
That's deism, right, which is why you're not a deist. If you think he does interact, that's a theist.
He can do whatever he wants to do with it.
He can do whatever he wants to with it, that's right. That's, well, I
He has no
agree.
limitations.
What's that?
He has no limitations.
You said he has no limitations. I disagree, but not with about the universe. But that's another story. Maybe we can talk about that later on. So I do think God is the best explanation of why the laws of nature. In naturalism, there's no explanation. Like there's no explanation why the universe popped into being. There's no explanation why the universe is fine-tuned. There's no explanation for why anything exists. There's no explanation for why there are laws of nature. I think theism best explains that. God, as it were, sustains the universe. He sustains it. He sustains it. I'm going to go ahead to number 5. I think God has the best explanation for why the universe is rational. Now, this is a long topic, and I'm going to say this very briefly. There is debate on what exactly mathematics are and whether mathematics really exist, if they're independent and on and on. My own view is that in my reading, most people, and I'm one of them, think mathematics is a real thing. It's an abstract object, sets and numbers. They really are real. What's debated is, do they have an essence real on their own, like almost like they're floating in this heavenly realm? Or are they a different kind of real? And I think they're a different kind of real. The typical Christian response has been what's called divine conceptualism. That is to say, mathematics come from the mind of God himself. So they're real, but they're real into the mind of God. God thinks that way. People who think they float out there by themselves are called Platonists, all the way back to Plato. And Platonism is getting a little more revived these days, but I think they're real. I also think that most mathematicians will say this, is what I can tell in my research. They think that the more, and scientists do, the more we study, the more we do math, the more we do any kind of science, we keep discovering more of the universe. Pure mathematicians, and I'm not one of them, but I read some of them, as little as I have to. That's not my strength. Usually they'll say things like, when I do math, he or she would say, when I'm doing pure mathematics and developing brand new ways how mathematics work, I'm not just making it up as I go along. They usually say words like, I've discovered a new theorem. I've discovered the way these numbers work. I've discovered there's no formula. When the Pythagorean theorem was created for triangles, when the quadratic equation was a formula, well, all these things were done, they'll say it was discovered. Like they went, eureka, they found a new rock. They found a new star. I found a new formula. It's a real thing that they seem to discover. That's how, not everyone, but most people treat it that way, and I think that's the way it should be treated. They've uncovered, they've stepped into a cave and go, oh my goodness, this math was here all along. We just discovered it. No one thinks it's preference. Oh, you like chocolate ice cream, I like vanilla, I like 2 + 2 = horse. No one really acts that way. They act like it's not a useful fiction, but something real. The second thing that's so fascinating is it always fits reality. It comports so well. The fact that Einstein can say E = mc squared, and it's the best testable equation ever been developed. It's 3 letters. It's beautiful. And it fits reality perfectly. And Einstein said that's the greatest mystery, is why the universe is rational. It's like it was made for us to understand. It's like it was made for math to fit it just right. And that's the main thing. I think God is the best explanation for why it is rational, and it just fits right. I can't make up those equations, but the ones I read can do it. And they'll say, yeah, it just fits so well. Science is always thinking that. In fact, there's a whole pursuit called they're looking for the theory of everything. Einstein wanted it real badly. The TOE, the TOE. The theory of everything. The idea is that scientists want to come up with that one math equation so short and simple, like E = mc squared, that explains everything. It's the governing formula for every other law of physics. It's the dream of any little young scientist. I'm going to figure it out. String theorists think they've discovered it, but most people don't think that's the way it is. I think God is the best explanation. Now, why is that? Because the Christian God is rational. He's the source of it. In John 1, we learn in the beginning was the what? The Word. The very beginning concept of everything in the universe was rationality. Christians don't start like naturalists. They start with a nothingness, and stuff comes, and billions of years later, rationality comes. The Christian worldview is exact opposite. The beginning wasn't stuff, and the beginning was rationality. There was a mind in the beginning that then created stuff and then is able to give that rationality to creatures as he sees fit. I think that much better fits the data. I think the reason why humans keep going, aha, I discovered this, and the universe is rational, and it fits just right, is because the universe is rational because there's a rational creator who wants us to figure it out. Naturalists will say, no, it's just a coincidence. They might be right. I think they're wrong. Any questions about those two quickly? Okay. Go back to, now we're switching gears dramatically. No more physics. You're welcome, unless you missed that, and I do a little bit. I'm kind of sad. Now I'm moving on to something else, and for one quick thing, which is biology. I'm convinced God's the best explanation for why there is DNA. Okay, DNA, or remember what DNA stands for? She got it. Got it too. Good. Right. DNA is the hereditary material in humans and almost all of the organisms. Nearly every cell in a person's body has the same DNA. Most DNA is located in the cell nucleus. It's called nuclear DNA. And a small of it DNA can be found in what's called the mitochondria. The information in DNA is stored as code that make up 4 chemical bases: A, G, C, and T. I won't tell you the main words that matter. Human DNA consists of about 3 billion bases, and more than 99% of those bases are the same in all people. More than 99% of us are identical in the DNA chromosome. The order or the exact sequence of those bases, like words in a syntax in a sentence, determines the information available for building and maintaining an organism. Just like letters and words have to form in just the right sequence for us to go, oh, that's a sentence, I get it. That's how it happens inside DNA. Just over 3 billion base pairs, or for you computer nerds, that's 1.5 gigabytes of information is in one chromosome. 1.5 gigabytes is in one chromosome, one microscopic chromosome inside of you and me. Estimates for the number of cells in the human body range from 10 to 100 trillion, probably depending on your weight. I won't point any fingers, but you know. Just a joke. Let us take 100 trillion cells as a generally accepted estimate, because that's a lot. 100 trillion cells in you and me. So given that each diploid cell contains about 1.5 gigabytes of data, the approximate amount of data stored in the human body is about 150 trillion gigabytes. That's a lot, isn't it, Damon? It's a lot of data. Since life depends on the presence of genetic information, any theory of the origin of life must provide an account for the origin of this information. There's a researcher named Bernd Olaf Koppers, and he said it this way, quote, "The problem of the origin of life is clearly basically equivalent to the problem of the origin of biological information." There is nothing close to an explanation in biology for where information came from in the beginning. Moreover, and it's a different issue, moreover, the living conditions billions and billions of years ago that most think where it started was overwhelmingly hostile because it wasn't the nitrogen oxygen base mixture like it is now. Back then, the chemicals were so radically different, it broke down any living tissue immediately. So there are two things going against it. One's much worse, which is where did information come from? Secondly, is the conditions on Earth to develop that. But I'm going to stuck with information for a second. I have a short video. I have to go out of the screen for a little bit to show you. So here's a short video to see what I'm talking about.
Here is a cell, the basic unit of all living tissue. In most human cells, there is a structure called the nucleus. The nucleus contains the genome. In humans, the genome is split between 23 pairs of chromosomes. Each chromosome contains a long strand of DNA, tightly packaged around proteins called histones. Within the DNA are sections called genes. These genes contain the instructions for making proteins. When a gene is switched on, an enzyme called RNA polymerase attaches to the start of the gene. It moves along the DNA, making a strand of messenger RNA out of free bases in the nucleus. The DNA code determines the order in which the free bases are added to the messenger RNA. This process is called transcription. Before the messenger RNA can be used as a template for the production of proteins, it needs to be processed. This involves removing and adding sections of RNA. The messenger RNA then moves out of the nucleus into the cytoplasm. Protein factories in the cytoplasm, called ribosomes, bind to the messenger RNA. The ribosome reads the code in the messenger RNA to produce a chain made up of amino acids. There are 20 different types of amino acid. Transfer RNA molecules carry the amino acids to the ribosome. The messenger RNA is read 3 bases at a time. As each triplet is read, a transfer RNA delivers the corresponding amino acid.
See the amino at the top?
This is added to a growing chain of amino acids.
She'll say in a second.
Once the last amino acid has been added, the chain folds into a complex 3D shape to form the protein.
They have to be in order to shape just right, and they have to be in the same form just right. You can't just throw them together. The amino acids have to be in the exact shape. Well, as much as you understood about that, the point is, of course, that it is instruction. When I go to build a swing set in the backyard and it comes with a big fat instruction manual, and it says, put this here, put this here, put this here, I have to look at those those instruction manual. If I put all the pieces right, out pops a swing set. It's very unlikely that if I empty all the parts of the swing set on the ground and shake it up, a swing set pops out. It's much more likely that that would happen than the 3 billion base pairs of DNA just happen to get the right spot to form. Now, the chromosome's different. We have 3 billion base pairs. But you say, well, what about amoeba? What about the tiniest? Nope, they've got about 1.5 million. So it's still much more likely if I shook up my anything out of my box and dumped them out, something would pop out, like a fixed car or something, than it is one single solitary cell What you need to have, outside of sounding ludicrous, of saying, oh, it's possible, you need a code. You need some instruction manual of how to put it together. And what you just saw is one process, and it's not even all of it, it's part of it. They left out several little things here and there that are fascinating. This gets us to one protein. One. If that doesn't mean much to you, it takes hundreds of millions and millions and millions and millions to form your body, and even small little things. So this process is an instruction manual. Evolutionists debate if information can be added along the way in the process. I'm not as concerned about that as am the very beginning. And that's what's so strikingly, overwhelmingly improbable. And there are a lot of other improbable things about it, but that's the main thing that I'm talking about tonight on that. I think God is the best explanation of why there is information at all. If I came upon, you came upon my book over there that I wrote, and someone said, look at there. I wonder where that came from. He said, oh, it exploded in a book factory. I mean, it's just silly. You'd say, no. I mean, if I open it up, look, there's words in it. And they're not just, well, you say they're words, they're just ink on a page. Yeah, but when you put them together in English language, this means something. These are forming sentences. The first thing any rational person would think is, oh, those words must have come from a person. All right, people have minds. A mind produced that. A mind didn't put the ink on the page, but the mind's the origin of the information that was written down in the language. The information came from a mind. Pick any language you want, German, Spanish, Finnish, it doesn't matter. That's how to communicate it. DNA can be used how they want, but the information is a profound mystery in naturalism. I don't know how God put the DNA there first. I have no scientific explanation for how God did it. I don't. I do think God is the causal agent. I think God's the best explanation for creating DNA. I think it's the best explanation for that. Any question about that? I hope you see the books I listed there. I hope you'll feel free to go read all you want. And let me go back just a little bit on top of page 5. If you read, I mentioned this last week, but just to highlight it again, Hugh Ross's book, Why the Universe is the Way It Is, I think is an easy read. It's not fluffy. It's kind of dense, but it's fast-paced. It is astonishing how much the universe and our galaxy, our solar system is fine-tuned. It's just amazing.
What was the name of it?
It's right there on top of page 5. Yeah.
Oh, Lord. I'm sorry.
That's right, Why the Universe is the Way It Is. Now, Lewis's and Barnes' book, A Fortunate Universe, Life in a Finely Tuned Cosmos, is also good. It is more technical. So it's not it's not that difficult, but it's much more technical than Ross's book. And then for a different view, Leonard Susskind's work is different. And the DNA, the classic Stephen Meyer Signature in the Cell, and then Behe's book, and there are others. I was trying to find a book, and there might be out there. I couldn't find a book that responds directly. There are all kinds of blogs that respond in opposition to the DNA, and all this stuff can be on YouTube. Look at these guys on YouTube as well, by the way. Church, if you like to listen or watch videos, look up Hugh Ross on video. Look up Stephen Meyer. Look at the people. Listen to the debates they have and make up your own mind. Okay, I'm going to go ahead quickly to number 7, unless there's a question. No, Kristen, you're making a face like... Maybe not. Okay, I think God is the best explanation for why there are moral laws. And so what I want to do now is...
Everyone has heard people quarrel. Sometimes it sounds funny and sometimes it sounds merely unpleasant. But however it sounds, I believe we can learn something very important from listening to the kinds of things they say. They say things like this: how do you like it if anyone did the same to you? That's my seat. I was there first. Leave him alone. He isn't doing you any harm. Why should you shove him first? Give me a bit of your orange. I gave you a bit of mine. Come on. You promised. People say things like that every day. Educated people as well as uneducated. And children as well as grown-ups. Now, what interests me about all these remarks is that the man who makes them is not merely saying that the other man's behavior doesn't happen to please him, He's appealing to some kind of standard of behavior which he expects the other man to know about. And the other man very seldom replies, "To hell with your standard." Nearly always he tries to make out that what he's been doing doesn't really go against the standard, or that if it does, there is some special excuse. He pretends there is some special reason in this particular case why the person who took the seat first shouldn't keep it, or that things were quite different when he was given the bit of orange, or that something has turned up which lets him off keeping his promise. It looks, in fact, very much as if both parties had in mind some kind of law or rule of fair play or decent behavior or morality, or whatever you like to call it, about which they really agreed. And they have. If they hadn't, they might of course fight like animals, but they couldn't quarrel in the human sense of the word. Quarreling means trying to show that the other man is in the wrong, and there would be no sense in trying to do that unless you and he had some sort of agreement as to what right and wrong are. Just as there'd be no sense in saying that a footballer had committed a foul unless there is some agreement about the rules of football. Now, this law or rule about right and wrong used to be called the law of nature. Nowadays, when we talk of the laws of nature, we usually mean things like gravitation or heredity or the laws of chemistry. But when the older thinkers called the law of right and wrong the law of nature, they really meant the law of human nature. The idea was that just as falling stones are governed by the law of gravitation and chemicals by chemical laws, so the creature called man also had his law, with this great difference, that the stone couldn't choose whether it obeyed the law of gravitation or not, but a man could choose either to obey the law of human nature or to disobey it. They called it law of nature because they thought that everyone knew it by nature and didn't need to be taught it. They didn't mean, of course, that you mightn't find an odd individual here and there who didn't know it, just as you find a few people who are colorblind or have no ear for a tune. But taking the race as a whole, they thought that the human idea of decent behavior was obvious to everyone. And I believe they were right. If they were not, then all the things we say about the war are nonsense. What is the sense in saying the enemy is in the wrong, unless right is a real thing, which the Germans at bottom know as well as we do, and ought to practice? If they have no notion of what we mean by right, then though we might still have to fight them, we could no more blame them for that than for the color of their hair. I know that some people say the idea of a law of nature or decent behavior known to all men is unsound because different civilizations and different ages have had quite different moralities. But this is not true. They have only had slightly different moralities. Just think what a quite different morality would mean. Think of a country where people were admired for running away in battle, or where a man felt proud of double-crossing all the people who had been kindest to him. You might just as well try to imagine a country where 2 and 2 made 5. Men have differed as regards what people you ought to be unselfish to, whether it was only your own family or your fellow countrymen, or everyone. But they have always agreed that you ought not to put yourself first. Selfishness has never been admired. Men have differed as to whether you should have 1 wife or 4, but they have always agreed that you must not simply have any woman you liked. But the most remarkable thing is this. Whenever you find a man who says he does not believe in a real right and wrong, you will find the same man going back on this a moment later. He may break his promise to you, but if you try breaking one to him, he will be complaining it's not fair before you can say Jack Robinson. A nation may say treaties don't matter, but then next minute they spoil their case by saying that the particular treaty they want to break was an unfair one. But if treaties don't matter, And if there is no such thing as right and wrong, in other words, if there is no law of nature, what is the difference between a fair treaty and an unfair one? Have they not let the cat out of the bag and shown that whatever they say, they really know the law of nature, just like anyone else? It seems then we are forced to believe in a real right and wrong. People may be sometimes mistaken about them, just as people sometimes get their sums wrong. But they are not a matter of mere taste and opinion any more than the multiplication table. Now, if we're agreed about that, I go on to my next point, which is this. None of us are really keeping the law of nature. If there are any exceptions among you, I apologize to them. They'd much better switch to some other station, for nothing I am going to say concerns them. And now, turning to the ordinary human beings who are left, I hope you won't misunderstand what I'm going to say. I'm not preaching, and heaven knows I don't pretend to be better than anyone else. I'm only trying to call attention to a fact. The fact that this year, or this month, or more likely this very day, we have failed to practice ourselves the kind of behavior we expect from other people. There may be all sorts of excuses for us. That time you were so unfair to the children was when you were very tired. That slightly shady business about the money, the one you've almost forgotten, came when you were very hard up. And what you promised to do for old so-and-so and have never done, well, you never would have promised if you had known how frightfully busy you were going to be. And as for your behavior to your wife, or husband, or sister, or brother, if I knew how irritating they could be, I wouldn't wonder at it. And who the dickens am I anyway? I'm just the same. That is to say, I don't succeed in keeping the law of nature very well. And the moment anyone tells me I'm not keeping it, there starts up in my mind a string of excuses as long as your arm. The question at the moment isn't whether they are good excuses. The point is that they are one more proof of how deeply, whether we like it or not, we believe in the law of nature. If we don't believe in decent behavior, why should we be so anxious to make excuses for not having behaved decently? The truth is, we believe in decency so much, we feel the rule or law pressing on us so, that we cannot bear to face the fact that we're breaking it, and consequently we try to shift the responsibility. For you notice that it is only for our bad behavior that we find all these explanations. It is only our bad temper that we put down to being tired, or worried, or hungry. We put our good temper down to ourselves. These, then, are the first 2 points I wanted to make tonight. First, that human beings all over the earth have this curious idea that they ought to behave in a certain way, and cannot really get rid of it. Secondly, that they don't in fact behave in that way. They know the law of nature,
And they
they
break.
break it. These two facts are the foundation of all clear thinking about ourselves and the universe we live in. Thank you.
He's going to deal with some objections, then I'm going to talk.
Now this is really so peculiar
Here we go.
that one is tempted to try to explain it away.
Just a few minutes.
For instance, we might try to make out that when you say a man ought not to act as he does, you only mean the same as when you say that a stone is the wrong shape, namely that what he is doing happens to be inconvenient to you. But that is simply untrue. A man occupying the corner seat in the train because he got there first, and a man who slipped into it while my back was turned and removed my bag, are both equally inconvenient, but I blame the second man, and do not blame the first. I am not angry, except perhaps for a moment before I come to my senses, with a man who trips me up by accident. I am angry with a man who tries to trip me up, even if he does not succeed. Yet the first has hurt me, and the second has not. Sometimes the behavior which I call bad is not inconvenient to me at all, but the very opposite. In war, Each side may find a traitor on the other side very useful. But though they use him and pay him, they regard him as human vermin. So you cannot say that what we call decent behavior in others is simply the behavior that happens to be useful to us. And as for decent behavior in ourselves, I suppose it is pretty obvious that it does not mean the behavior that pays. It means things like being content with 30 shillings when you might have got £3, doing schoolwork honestly when it would be easy to cheat, leaving a girl alone when you would like to make love to her, staying in dangerous places when you could go somewhere safer, keeping promises you would rather not keep, and telling the truth, even when it makes you look a fool. Some people say that though decent conduct does not mean what pays each particular person at a particular moment, still it means what pays the human race as a whole, and that consequently there is no mystery about it. Human beings, after all, have some sense. They see that you cannot have any real safety or happiness except in a society where everyone plays fair, and it is because they see this that they try to behave decently. Now, of course, it is perfectly true that safety and happiness can only come from individuals, classes, and nations being honest and fair and kind to each other. It is one of the most important truths in the world. But as an explanation of why we feel as we do about right and wrong, it just misses the point. If we ask, why ought I to be unselfish? And you reply, because it is good for society, we may then ask, why should I care what's good for society except when it happens to pay me personally? And then you will have to say, because you ought to be unselfish, which simply brings us back to where we started. You are saying what is true, but you are not getting any further. If a man asked what was the point of playing football, it would not be much good saying, in order to score goals, for trying to score goals is the game itself, not the reason for the game. And you would really only be saying that football was football, which is true, but not worth saying. In the same way, if a man asks, what is the point of behaving decently, it is no good replying, in order to benefit society. For trying to benefit society, in other words, being unselfish, for society, after all, only means other people, is one of the things decent behavior consists in. All you are really saying is that decent behavior is decent behavior. You would have said just as much if you had stopped at the statement, men ought to be unselfish. And that is where I do stop. Men ought to be unselfish, ought to be fair. Not that men are unselfish, nor that they like being unselfish, but that they ought to be. The moral law, or law of human nature, is not simply a fact about human behavior in the same way as the law of gravitation is, or may be, simply a fact about how heavy objects behave. On the other hand, it is not a mere fancy, for we cannot get rid of the idea, and most of the things we say and think about men would be reduced to nonsense if we did. And it is not simply a statement about how we should like men to behave for our own convenience. For the behavior we call bad or unfair is not exactly the same as the behavior we find inconvenient, and may even be the opposite. Consequently, this rule of right and wrong, or law of human nature, or whatever you call it, must, somehow or other, be a real thing. A thing that is really there, not made up by ourselves. And yet it is not a fact in the ordinary sense, in the same way as our actual behavior is a fact. It begins to look as if we shall have to admit that there is more than one kind of reality, that in this particular case, there is something above and beyond the ordinary facts of men's behavior, and yet quite definitely real. A real law, which none of us made, but which we find pressing on us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let me put this together, if I may. repeat some of this and also do some things a little different direction. I believe God has the best explanation for why I say objective moral values, why there are objective moral values. Every human, besides those with serious disorders, and that's a really important point, there are people with two different kinds of disorders, one in particular, who don't seem to pick up, or it's really an antisocial behavior. We're not sure if they can't pick up the moral law or if they just don't feel a sense of guilt, that they know they ought to do it, but if they break it, they don't care. And those are psychopaths, or psychopathy is this disorder, right? So psychopathy, and then the worst kind, depending on but for morality, is sociopathy. Now, again, these are primarily antisocial, but if you have one of these disorders, this is really, really serious, you need a therapist, because this has to do with that. But besides people with a serious psychological disorder, Asians, Mexicans, Africans, Canadians, everybody besides people with disorders really do think that we ought to do the right thing. I think C.S. Lewis is exactly right. Everybody thinks it. I've been to many, many states, and I've been to several countries in my life, praise God, and I've never met a person who didn't assume this. It's bad wherever I go to steal. It's wrong wherever I go to button line. It's wrong everywhere I go to show disrespect. Across the board. And that is called what we call the moral law. And I did a whole class on morality. It was several weeks long, and I hope you have this all on Facebook, and I have a podcast for it, I have handouts for it. But to say very briefly, was it 4 weeks, 6 weeks course on that, to say in just a few minutes, moral values are universal. And if we listed on the board, and we could, all kinds of things that any society is going to uphold, like it's a good moral value to be fair or just, to be kind, and on and on. I could list all kinds of loyal, all down the list. These are moral values. To demonstrate honor to a person or respect a person. What cultures change on, sometimes certain cultures don't have all the values other cultures have. Sometimes they don't have the same values other cultures have. So let's say, for example, in the USA, we might make a list, I'm just being hypothetical, we make a list of 10 different moral values. I go to a different country, a different culture, they might have 9 of them. The 10th one's missing is not a bad thing, it's not the same as moral value. But in general, the values across the board are going to be very similar. What most people get confused is not the moral values, which are across the board are so profoundly universal. And that's why I use the word objective, meaning they seem to be above us, like mathematics. I can talk to an Indian, an African, a Mexican, and go 2 + 2 equals, they're going to say 4. Usually if they know anything about mathematics. It's a quote-unquote above us. It's not literally above us all, right? It's beyond us. It's transcendent. Morality is very similar. So that's what most people get confused as they think about it. They think these are all radically different on culture. All cultures are different morality. No, they don't. What most people get confused for moral values really is social etiquette. Etiquette is what is different. Etiquette is typically the way we express these moral values, the way we express them. And I've used this analogy several times. It still works, I think. If I go into most Asian cultures and I want to demonstrate honor or respect, what am I going to do? If I'm Japanese, I'm going to bow. I'm demonstrating what moral value? I'm showing honor and respect. If I'm an American, what do? I shake hands. If you're from the South, you shake hands how? Firmly. You look them in the eye. Our etiquette's different, but we're all trying to express our moral values. What most people do is look at etiquette and say, see, it's a free-for-all, wildly different moral values. No, they're not. And if you get past the etiquette nonsense, you go, oh, if I'm British, I kiss on each cheek, or if I'm Australian, I'm still showing honor and respect. To show maybe an act of kindness. And we add love on here. Another moral value, of course, is the preservation of human life. Now, the moral law, let's think of it this way. C.S. Lewis calls them instincts. I like the word moral value better. If we make a list of all these moral values and see them like keys on a keyboard, these are all the moral values. And in any given moment, which moral value do I play? Which one do I pick to act on? That's called what? For your morality study. That's called, okay, maybe I don't remember. That's called the duty. Moral duty is which moral value I choose in the moment. The moral law tells us which one to pick. Like sheet music tells us which note to push. So for example, if I'm up here down the road and I see a car on fire on the side of Mass Street, I'll feel different moral values or different instincts. One moral value is to preserve my own human life. So that instinct is run, it's hot. I might, what if it blows up all of a sudden? I'll feel another instinct that says, you better go help. You try to help preserve someone else's human life. I might try to be kind or loving and so forth. So I have different values that are, all right. There are different moral values that I have inside of me, and I'm trying to figure out which one I should employ in this second. The moral law tells me which one. Now, in that scenario, which one would I probably choose? So someone will bring this up, which one I probably choose? What would I feel the most compelled to do? And the most guilt if I did not do it? Save the person. And C.S. Lewis makes this point in another one in the book. We typically choose the moral value that puts us the most at risk. Now, why do we do that? Because it feels like the right thing to do. The moral law almost always tells us a thing that's sacrificial. It can't be because moral values come from our need to survive and help culture and society if we die. So that's what the moral law is, that seemingly outside impulse that tells us we ought to do the right thing. So, once again, all humans, besides those with serious psychological disorders, apprehend or grasp or apprehends the moral law. We have this intuitive compulsion to do the right thing. It is an ought. An ought. And this is what's very different from the moral law versus every other law. No one thinks this marker ought to fall down to the stand. It ought to, or it broke a rule. If the wind blew down a tree out in the forest, no one says it should have fallen that way. It ought to have had. It would have been bad if it didn't. No one says that. That'd be silly. It's just doing what things do when wind blows it over. It's just act like nature. No one says that when a male lion kills a deer, man, that lion just murdered that deer. It needs to go to jail. It should be punished for breaking the moral. No one says that. No one thinks the lion is obeying has to feel a sense of the moral law. Humans do. It feels like an ought. It feels like a commandment. So we have these two basic things of this moral law. It is universal, objective, beyond us, transcendent. All humans appeal to it, besides the serious psychological disorders ones. Secondly, it feels like a commandment. And we don't experience anything else in existence that's like that. Now think of, let that sink in for a second if it hasn't already. Just let that sink in for a little bit. For example, most people follow the basic canons of logic. For example, you can't be, the law of non-contradiction. That's like saying, I'll make an example, I don't speak English. Okay, I just contradicted myself, I just spoke English. That'd be silly. That makes sense. So, I mean, that's just silly. You can't say that. That's nonsense, David. You can't contradict yourself. That's a basic law of logic. You can't do that. But I don't feel like I ought not to be illogical, nor do I feel guilty when I am. If I say 2 + 2 = 5, you go, you ought not say that. You should know better. You should be ashamed of yourself. Do I feel guilty if I put the wrong answer in mathematics? At least I didn't, never in my entire childhood. Even now in my adulthood, Damon, I wouldn't, because I'm not a mathematician. I mean, I know basic math, but I would never go, oh, I feel awful. So we have this sense, not only of oughtness that comes from morality, but the sense of guilt when we should have done otherwise. And it doesn't work that way in anything else. We might call it the laws of logic, but no one feels they ought to do it. The laws of grammar, but no one feels like you ought to make sure your verb and subject agreement match. There's something very different about morality. And why is it universal? Why does it feel like a commandment? Why is it universal? Why does it feel like a commandment? Does that make sense so far? Yeah, some of you are fading. Let's stay with me. Okay. Atheists, non-naturalists, they act as if there's objective moral values. Most of them do. And that's a good thing. I like that. If not, it'd be overwhelming anarchy all the time. I want them to act like that. And secondly, as a theist, I go, of course you act like that. Of course you feel the moral law because you're human. The question is, who has the best explanation for why a universal experience of humans is that we ought to do the right thing? Where does it come from? That's what we're looking for. Not, do we feel it? Yes. Why do we feel it? And I'm going to go on there for a second, but go ahead. You have a question?
No, I was going to say God.
Okay, God, good. As a Christian theist, I think God is the best and, quite frankly, the only explanation. Naturalists, for many, many, many years, well, all kinds of non-Christians, they're back to Aristotle. There have been many, many attempts, many ethical theories that attempt to explain where they come from and why we feel that. So it's not that Christians are the only people to think about it. There are tons of different theories. That's not the issue, is whether or not you find the theories convincing. You might. Go read them. There's all kinds of different moral theories out there. I personally do not find them convincing at all. I think by far the best explanation is that the reason why we feel we have a moral oughtness, and it's universal, is there's a moral lawgiver. Now, if you're a naturalist, what you have to say, and I have a lot more on this on that study I did, they have to say is that morality isn't based on moral value. It is merely social etiquette. It's just a biological delusion to help us survive as a species. That's all it is. It's a useful fiction to help make sure we don't all kill each other. That's the number one explanation given by naturalists. That can't be right. It can't be right for three reasons. At least, I have about 7 or 8, but I'm going to give you 3. You're welcome. I know you're just like, okay, stay with me. Can I give you 3 reasons, or do you want me to just move on? I'm serious about this. You want me to just move on, or do you want me to?
Reason.
Okay, well, because I know some of you all heard this before. Evolution cannot be the explanation of why it's universal, why it's good. They're all big knockout ones. Number 1, David Hume said this back in the 18th century. It's called a naturalistic fallacy. You cannot get an ought from an is. You cannot get an ought from an is. You cannot say, it just is the case that humans develop a certain way. It just is, and that develops an ought. You cannot logically do that. That is nonsense. That tree fell by the wind. It's just an is, and it ought to behave that way. You might mean that a little bit like, well, with the laws of physics, but no one thinks it ought to have. Like it did the right thing by falling there. You can't do that. And humans are, that analogy, are like trees. You can't do that. If we are merely the result of blind natural processes, it makes no sense to say an ought comes from an is. And morality feels like an ought, not just an is. I sneeze, that's an is. I yawn, that's an is. I'm hungry, that's an is. I don't ought to sneeze. I don't ought to yawn. They're very different. So I experience in me is all the time. The ought is something very different. The second reason why I can explain that is, this is called the genetic fallacy. The genetic fallacy is when you attempt to explain whether or not something is true or false when you discover its origin. KU is the number 1 team in the conference. Number 1. Of course you think that because you're from Lawrence. What does my having been from Lawrence have anything to do with the fact that they're number 1? Everything, because you're from Lawrence. That's the genetic fallacy. If I can discover where you got the belief from, it means the belief is false. Does that track? That's nonsense. They're number 1 based on the records. Not that's right, but the records of the team. I could be from Alaska and go, KU is number 1 in the conference. What are they going to say then? Of course that, you're white. I mean, what does that have to do with anything? Your parents told you that. So what? the origin doesn't have, so when it comes to genetics, if you say, well, biology, development evolved us, gave us this morality, aha, that's where it came from. That's where it came from doesn't mean it's false. That's called epistemology. And the third major reason is, that is not at all, I can't do this while I'm talking, I have to stop, experience. If you say, there's no such thing as morality, and most naturalistic ethicists do say that. There's no such thing as morality, it's an illusion. We're delusory. That's not what experience tells us. That is, everything in our bones, you might say, everything in our intuition tells us, yes, it is wrong to eat babies. Yes, it is wrong to rape people. Yes, it is wrong to murder. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is right to tell the truth. Yes, it is right. There are real moral values. And so everything in the human experience besides the people with serious disorders tell us it can't just be an illusion. It's as real and powerful a fact as my normal experience of everything else, like if I'm hot or cold or hungry or thirsty. But more than that, because there's an intuitive mental state that tells me that. So if evolution is true that it's only illusion, we have a huge problem with why is it all humans say, no, it's not. And I've heard atheists and naturalists say, I know it sure feels like it. It's a very powerful urge. That's an illusion. And I could say a lot more about that. They'll say, well, and I'll say, if that's true, is what Hitler did wrong? Well, yeah. What do you mean by wrong? Well, I mean, he shouldn't have done it. Why not? Because you don't do that to help society survive. They say that's exactly what they thought. They thought it did help society survive. Who are you to tell them it was wrong? Well, maybe I wouldn't do it. That's not what we're saying. If you think morality is a preference, like I like chocolate ice cream, then you've not really come to grips with what morality is. Now, most naturalists, I'm going to say in the sermon this week too, most naturalists and atheists, they think that humans are the source of morality. Sam Harris is real well known for this, saying humans should just use their rationality. This is a fundamental difference between Christians and naturalists. Christians admit that humans are not and cannot be the source of morality because we're not the source of good. We can't be. And humans don't talk that way, just as C.S. Lewis said. You stole my seat. No one says, so? They give an excuse for why it was okay. It's okay that I broke the moral law. I was here first. Or you weren't looking. It's okay that I stole that candy because you shouldn't have had it out. Not, who cares? Everyone assumes there's a moral law and we justify it. And that's what we do on the inside of ourselves. And that's true when you go to God. A lot of people think getting God's forgiveness means we just tell him all our excuses. I was really tired. I know I shouldn't have yelled at my spouse, but I was real tired. God, is that cool, God? Okay, you understand. Good. Next. And Lewis is also helpful there. That's what most people think, and that's why they think, well, I'm not real sure if God's forgiven me. Because I think he's right. I think most people think when people come to me, Dave, I'm not sure, how do I know God's forgiven me? I usually ask through a series of questions and conversation. I'll get them to try to figure out whether or not they think that they've really asked God's forgiveness or if they've asked God to accept their excuses. They're very different things. Is God okay with the fact that I was tired and still yelled at him? Is God okay with the fact that I was really hungry and that's why I stole? I've given him excuses for years and years and years. I'm not real sure if he's accepted my excuses. I would say, you're right, he hasn't. Forgiveness doesn't mean God goes, oh, okay, that makes sense. That's not what forgiveness is. Okay, so, any questions about that?
No. Makes good sense.
You haven't lost me completely yet.
That's good, not yet, ever. Okay, well, I'm going to lose you now. Let me say real quickly, because of time. I do want to cover this, though, very quickly. I'm sorry if I lose you on this. Every single atheist or nationalist you ever meet who's thought this through, they will always mention at least one, well, they're going to say two things. We got it from evolution. That's nonsense. Secondly, they're going to say Euthyphro dilemma. Plato's Euthyphro dilemma. They're going to say that. You may never talk to an atheist, you may never hear this, but if you do, you're going to hear this, you're going to hear it on YouTube, read your books. Can I say something very briefly about that? Because they'll say, you can't say God is the source of morality. Oh, let me say a quick word about that. Well, David, do you think, if you're asking me, David, do you think God is commanding everybody all the time to go save that person in the car? Like he's ushering out commandments all the time, individual commandments? I don't think so. I believe in what's called the divine command theory, is what as I just explained. I think God is the best explanation. God's character is the source of moral values. He's the source of them. Like he's the standard of the 12-inch ruler. He's the standard of the weight of a kilogram. He is the standard. Moral values, whatever it means to be kind, loving, whatever, comes from his very character. It flows out like the water flows out of a fountain. He is it. I don't think every time we feel like we ought to push that note or that note, do that instinct, that value, it's God commanding it. Maybe it is. My own view, does that be your view? My own view is that we are a soul with our body, and our soul has the capacity, like a radio frequency, to pick in on the moral law frequency. There's a radio station, and we have it. It's called the moral law. So it's that whatever. We can pick up on that all the time. It's not perfect, especially when you're not a Christian. Because we would say your spirit, as it were, is defunct. There's a disease. You can't fully pick up on it, but you can pick up on it. Everybody can pick up on that frequency. 98.3.
You have to have your antenna up.
Have your antenna up. And my view is that everyone's soul has the antenna up, but they're not all equally in tune. They're not all equal the same. I think people have serious psychological disorders. But in general, I think everybody has that in tune. And so I think when we feel like we ought to do X, Y, Z, it is part of it. Now, a little footnote, if I may. There are people, I'm not one of them, who would say this argument, number 7, what God was the best explanation for objective moral values, fits into the direct evidence category, not circumstantial. What I mean is, C.S. Lewis and many, and I'm one of them in this regard, I believe that this sense of moral oughtness is a kind of direct evidence of God himself, much like religious experience is. So when I first did this years ago, I thought about putting this one over on the very end of the whole study, which we haven't gotten to yet. Have like religious experience and moral law. I think something in us, our gut, you have, so that's to say, if I talk to an atheist, they go, I don't think God exists. I'll say, you've experienced him. What are you talking about? You ever felt like you ought to do the right thing? Well, yeah, that's God. There's something inside of us. And Lewis makes the argument, if there's one conceivable way God could make himself present all the time, it couldn't be in nature. Because we would just study that and say, that's wood, that's molecules, whatever. The only place God could ever make himself directly known by everybody is inside of you. Each human being has that ability to pick up on the moral law. I think it's a big, fat, huge finger pointing to God that the best explanation is God, the sense of oughtness. Okay. And the Euthyphro dilemma, can I say this real quickly? Stay with me if you can. We're almost done. You're doing a good job. In Plato's Euthyphro dilemma, which is this last second, you see the second thing. What's on your handout there? I think I just put Euthyphro. Oh, I didn't put that at all. In this dialogue, Euthyphro, in Plato's Euthyphro, he tries to explain to Socrates that piety is what the gods love. Socrates asked Euthyphro whether the gods love the pious because they're good, or whether the pious are good because the gods love them. I know you fully understood that. Let me rephrase that. That's what he said, though, in the English translation. That is something a moral good because God wills it, or does God will it because it's good? Is something a moral good because God wills it, or does God will it because it's good? David, who gives a rip? Why is this some rejoinder to Christianity? Here's why. If it's the first, it's a moral good because God wills it. It makes morality seem arbitrary because God could will something different all the time. He could tell me it's good to murder babies and tell you it's good to save babies. If he just wills out little things here and there, little commandments, it could be arbitrary. You say, I had to do it, God told me to. And that's the argument, seems arbitrary. The argument, and I think that's powerful because that's not how we experience morality. It's consistent, it doesn't seem arbitrary, it seems like the right thing to do. So if it's good because God wills it, it makes morality seem arbitrary. If it's the second one, God does it because it's good, that seems to be the case. That means good is above and beyond God. Which means it can't be God. God can't be the sense of morality. So that means it doesn't answer the question, where does morality come from? And it doesn't match the typical theistic definition of God. So that's what this dilemma is. If you say either option, you seem stuck. It's either arbitrary or there's a moral law above God. Well, if that's the case, then God can't be the source of morality. Well, this is only a dilemma if you accept one particular view of something called volunteerism. Volunteerism. To save time, I'm not going to go through all the options. But in my own view is that, as I said just a second ago, I want to say it one more time. God's very character is where we get values. Values. His character is where we get our values. His commandment is where we get our duties. So values are not arbitrary. And they're not above God. They flow straight from God. Why is it good to be loyal? Because we pick up on that radio signal, it seems to me, that's God's very character. God is loyal. We should be loyal too. We ought to be loyal. Why is it good to tell the truth? Why is it good to be honest? Because God's honest. That's his character. He's honest. Does that make sense? Why is it good to be respectful? Because God is respectful. Why is it good to preserve human life? Because these characters come out of here. The duties are different. Moral commandments come out of his duties, and those depend on the person, the situation, on and on. For example, humans have the moral duty to preserve human life unless God commands it in some way. God does not under that duty. God does not issue the same duty to himself. I have a truck. If I went there and slashed the tires, you might think I'm crazy, but what you wouldn't say is I'm evil. It's my truck. I'll do what I want to in my truck. I don't have the moral duty to take care of my truck or not damage it. You have the moral duty not to damage my truck. It's not your truck. You're under the moral duty to respect my stuff because it's my property. I'm not under the same moral duty. Does that make sense? Kinda? No? I have the moral duty to raise my children. They're my children. You don't have the moral duty to raise my children. I do. You're not guilty if you don't go to my house tonight and make sure they get fed. But I'm guilty as a parent if I make sure they don't have some food. That's my moral duty. So moral duties are all the time different depending on all kinds of situations. God is not under the moral duty to make sure we live the same way. We have different moral duties than God does. To God, we are all his truck. He's under no moral obligation to make sure I'm nice and shiny and clean forever and live a nice, fat, healthy life. He's under no obligation. There's no moral duty he's violating. So I see moral duties as rooted in God's commandments. His moral values rooted in his nature. There's no dilemma. There's no dilemma. This is called essentialism, but there's no dilemma at all. So what do moral values come from? God. Well, David, could those moral values have been different? What if God really liked betraying? Then it would be good to betray, right? The answer is no, because God's moral character, God's essence, it can't be different. It is logically impossible to have a God who does like lying, whose moral value it is to eat babies. If you don't understand that, it's like, I wish David weren't from Mississippi. Well, he is. You don't get to have me in a way I'm not. I wish David weren't 6'3" or 4. Well, sorry. It just is what it is. I'm from there. That's my past. I'm this, my height. You can't pick and choose the things. What if David were different? No, it wouldn't be David anymore. David, by essence, that's what it means. Now, that's not the exact analogy. These are contingent, but God's that way. We don't get a different God. The God that is morally perfect, good, and that's it. So does God have duties? Well, yes and no. When God issues a duty to himself, like, I'll protect you, Israel, he's giving a moral duty to himself. Now he's going to hold his promise. But God does not have the moral duties that humans have. And in my experience, every single naturalist or atheist who complains about God, every single one of them assumes God has the exact same moral duties that we do. That's a false belief, a false assumption. if your God were so good, he would do X. My response always is, why? Why do you think God has that moral duty? Well, because we have to. There's your fault. That's your problem. There's your problem. And I want to show this quick video. This is real quick, and you may not care, but I thought this was really, really interesting. And then we're about wrapped up. Hopefully we'll keep going. I was watching this the other day.
Hi, everybody. I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson of Frederick.
Yeah, I was watching this. Anyway, this is the 2018. They have this for years and years now. Not for that. It's not that long. It's pretty new. The Isaac Asimov Memorial Debate. And they bring in some of the top brilliant people in the world to come to this. And it's a sold out, packed out tickets. I mean, it's immediately packed out. Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's the guy about to talk, is a well-known, well-respected astrophysicist. The topic is on artificial intelligence. And they brought in the guy who's in charge of the IBM Deep Blue. Know what's his name? Watson. He's the chief engineer on Watson. They bring in the chief engineer, one of the chief engineers for Google. These are big dogs at the top of the companies. Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's about to talk with a mustache, he's a great astrophysicist. He asks Michael Wellman, who's professor of computer science and engineering at University of Michigan, he asks him about artificial intelligence. They start talking about morality. Well, if we develop these machines that become conscious, what happens when they start doing things? And there's a real, if you don't know this, for many years now, for a long time, really, I mean, for years, there are books written on this topic of what do we do when they do become self-aware. Most movies think they turn into Terminator, all kinds of stuff. But they're working on now, how do I program machines to help make sure they don't go crazy and kill all the humans? If you're not, artificial intelligence, you know what that is, right? So we're developing computers. The idea is they become self-aware, conscious. Well, the moral issue is a big deal. And I was watching this debate, listened to it, I think it was a couple weeks ago. I was so excited. As a nerd, I was at the gym. And I got Elaine, she was on the treadmill. I said, "This is great." She said, sweat pouring off her face. "Sounds good, honey, whatever." Yeah, just pray for her. And so he asked the question, he asked the question right here. This is Dr. Michael Wellman. He asked him about morality. He's going to give the analogy example. There's an ethical example where he says, talk about the trolley example. And this is basically when you had to choose between saving a life or not pulling a lever, and it kills people. It's a common moral dilemma. Do you save one person or do you not pull the trigger? You'll save a baby or a person, but you know it's going to kill these other people. That's a moral dilemma. But what he says is, the point is, if artificial intelligence were programmed and it became alive, how would they know what to do? Now listen very carefully to what he says, Dr. Michael Wellman, the guy in the glasses, what he says about what he wants artificial intelligence to be able to do.
This became popular in psychology to pose ethical dilemmas to people and see how they react. And there's many variations of it, but the standard kind of story is a trolley is going down a track and it's about to hit or kill 3 people, and then you notice that there's a switch, and you could make it go over to another track where there's only 1 person, and you could choose to kill that other person instead of the first 3. Would you do it? And
So the dilemma there is somebody's going to die no matter what. You either can not touch it, then the trolley kills 3 people on its own, or you can intervene and actively kill 1 person.
Right. Now, I'm not a psychologist, but I think it seems to be a kind of silly question to ask people, because humans can really never get, I think, into a mental state where they can really believe that with certainty, if I take this action, I'll kill this 1 person for sure, and the other action. There's always this uncertainty. There's always questions about what to blame with. It's not actually a realistic situation. So the question is, will AIs actually was it more realistic for them perhaps? Could an autonomous vehicle be in a situation where all of a sudden a bicyclist runs in front of it and has a chance to swerve and do some other damage, and will it have to weigh that?
We have to take out the vegetable cart first, and then find out what else it does.
Yeah, and so will they have to be coded in them what the solutions are to those dilemmas? When it does happen.
Right. So that implies that humans get together, figure out a solution, and you hand it to AI. That's not the point of AI. The AI is going to have some higher intelligence than we do. And that's why I'm curious. You bring AI to that problem, is it going to give different answers than we would? And then we said, oh my gosh, we never thought about it that way. Let's do it that way.
So I think this is what's going in some of the discussion here. Actually, no, AI, the idea is we want to give, for the humans to give the AI the values. And the AI is concerned with making decisions and taking actions to promote those values. So ultimately, we are saying, we value life. That's part of what the robot laws are for.
There are no robot laws. They are science fiction.
No.
Isaac Asimov.
Because so the danger is that they would be weaponized by the party that is programming them and is controlling them. Not that they're going to all of a sudden decide to get rid of the humans. That's not the source of the danger. With respect to the kind of trolley problem situation in this hypothetical autonomous vehicle, when it does happen that one of these cars runs over a bicyclist, and it'll happen, I think, much less frequently than humans do it today. We'll take the black box. I hope they're engineers that they have a black box that captures everything that was in their senses all the time, and it's very secure, so they can't lie about it. And then we'll be able to dissect it, and we'll say, you made this decision. Why did you do that? You might say, well, I hit the bicycle because if I swerved to the left, I would have run over, a child. Or if it said, well, I did that because if I swerved too fast, I'd wake up the passenger. Then you'd say, no, that was the wrong decision. That was not what we meant for you to do.
I wake up the passenger. Do you get where I'm going with this at all? These are some of the brightest minds in the world trying to figure out how to design consciousness. And they go, how do we do that? Because we know there's such a thing as morality. How do we do it such that, A, it's genuinely free to make a free choice, but B, obeys the moral law? If you command it always to behave a certain way, it's not free. The way to guarantee that is you put moral values in them. That is exactly what Christianity teaches about God. God has implanted into us moral values. If he made us obey the moral values in a certain way, to the duties we made us do it, we don't have the freedom not to do it. I wish you'd have gone the next step further and said, I wish you'd have said what I just said. Neil deGrasse Tyson alluded to, he said, wait. The whole point of AI is not that you make them, but that they're able to do it on themselves. And he was right. We put the values in there so they can choose it themselves. And then there's maybe a little black box, in an airplane that records everything. We'll take that out and what? What is he talking about? But what's another word for evaluate what they did with it and decide whether it was right or wrong to make that choice? We call that judgment. We will look back on their life, the black box out, and judge them. That's exactly what they're doing. They're making us gods. That's judgment. Well, look at it. Why did you do that? Why did you do that? Well, I didn't want to wake up my passenger. And he said, oh, that was wrong. That was wrong. The assumption is that AI had a choice to do otherwise, had the moral duty, you should not have done that, and you still did it anyway. That's artificial intelligence. In other words, this is not some crazy Christianese nonsense preacher that's people, whatever make up. This is cutting-edge technology of trying to figure out how consciousness can be created. And yet they're talking exactly as I just talked for 15, 20 minutes, and so did C.S. Lewis, talking about a robot. You take out robot and put in the word human. God has designed us with moral values in us. He does not make us choose those things because we have the freedom to do it. But we feel like we ought to. As C.S. Lewis said, the two basic facts of humans are, we know there's a moral law, and we break it. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. And at the very end, we get a black box, metaphorically speaking.
We want it to have a soul.
That's right. That's exactly, they want to have a rational soul. I won't be able to finish all that tonight, but any questions about anything so far? I hope that analogy helped, at least it helped me. That's why I was all excited. I went, he just said what I said. Okay, anything at all about anything we've covered so far? I could go on, but the last one is so fun. I want to slow down on it. That's about the soul and afterlife. I've got some afterlife stories I want to tell you, and I don't do that right now. So, is there anything at all that I need to cover again? Any question about something we've covered thus far? Well, thank you, Lord Jesus, so much, and Father and Spirit for loving us and giving us moral values that we get to pick up on, and your loving care to help us do the right thing. And we thank you so much. There are a lot of clues that point to you, it seems to me. And I like that because it reveals more of your character, that you're overwhelmingly intelligent and powerful and good and loving, and that you are worth exploring. A knowledge of you is worth everything. We thank you for these clues that point in such the same direction. We thank you that you're not unknowable and so obscure we just have no clue about you. Instead we're surrounded by stuff and keep discovering more things that sure point to you. We thank you for that. Help us grasp what we can and be able to articulate to other people the faith and the hope that is in us, if it is in us, in a way that is kind, informed, and loving and true. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.